Back in the early days of the World Wide Web, a very common feature of most websites was a thing called a hit counter. You don't see hit counters too often anymore, but back in those earlier web days, they were very common. You would see them on almost every website, and they were basically just a count of how many people had visited that website that you could then show off to everybody else to show how wonderful and how popular your website was. Creating a hit counter is something that we can fairly easily do at this point using PHP. Being able to create a hit counter would basically involve us storing a number and then adding 1 to that number every time our script is run, every time our page is accessed. Because we have to be able to store this number long term, and there has to be one number that's shared between all users, there's really no way that this could potentially be done using HTML or JavaScript. A server-side scripting language like PHP is really the only way. So what I have here is I have my basic HTML page set up, and eventually what I want to do is down in the body, I want to be able to display my hit count. I'm going to put in a set of PHP tags here down in the body, and I'm going to echo a variable called current count. I haven't actually created that variable yet, but that will be sort of the purpose of this script, to make sure we have a current count variable, and that every time this script is accessed, the current count variable goes up by 1. Back up at the very top of the script, before the document even starts, is where I'm going to do the processing that's necessary to determine what my current count is. I'll put in a set of PHP tags way back up here at the beginning, and I think I might start by creating a current count variable, and I'm just going to initialize that current count variable so that it starts off at 0. Essentially what the idea is that if we don't have a current count from a file that already exists, this will be sort of our default starting place for the value of our current count. I'm also in here somewhere going to want to increment current count to make it go up by 1. So let me put in current count equals current count plus 1. So that'll be the line that actually takes whatever my previous count was and adds 1 to it. And it'll be somewhere after that statement that I then want to save that number again. So that's kind of the simple part of what I need to do, right? The part that makes it a little bit more interesting is what if there is a previous count. If there is, I don't want to start with a current count of 0. What I want to do instead is start with whatever count I already have. So let's assume that any count that we might already have is simply stored in a file, a little text file that has nothing in it but a number that is our count. Let me start by opening that file. I'll say this file is called count.txt, and for the time being I'm going to open this file in read mode. Read mode because at this point all I'm really interested in doing is reading what the current count should be. Now there's of course the possibility that if I've just launched the script or if I've just moved it to a new server or maybe even if something's gone wrong that file might not exist, so I always need to check for that. There we go. So if that file actually does exist, and again assuming that file has a number stored in it, I could read that number out and make that my current count. So let me say current count is going to equal what I get back when I do fgetS, reading a line from my file. Why fgetS? Well, in this particular case, all I'm doing is reading a single line, which is just a number on it. That's all I really want to read from the file. I don't need to do anything more complicated. There are no fields to break up or divide. Really, I just need to read in that one number that's in the file and be done with it. I'll go ahead and close the file once that's complete, and that should do the trick. So when the script first starts, we'll assume that we have a current count of 0, but we'll then attempt to get a more realistic current count from our count file. If that count file doesn't exist, then current count just stays 0, and that'll be our starting place. But if the file does exist and we're able to read that number out of it, then we'll use that as our current count. We'll add 1 to it. That value is what will then actually be displayed down below on the page. That will be the current count that the user sees in the form of my hit counter. Now, of course, that's not going to handle the situation of what happens the next visit. The next visit, I don't want to start at the same current count and add 1 to it. That would basically mean I would always show everybody a current count of 1. So what I need to do is after I've incremented my current count, I need to actually store it again. So that means putting this number back into the count file again. Let me go ahead and reopen the count file. This time when I reopen the file, I'm going to open it in write mode. W mode. By opening it in write mode, I'm of course opening the file so that I can then write data to it, but as an added advantage, the W mode will automatically cause anything I write to the file to overwrite anything that's already in the file. So I don't have to do anything more complicated than just this, just using the W mode in order to get my new count to replace my old count. There is, of course, still always the possibility that maybe the file can't be opened for some reason. So let me double check and just make sure that it is. And if the file actually is opened, I can then write to it. So I'll do an fwrite statement. I want to write out to my file, and what it is that I want to write out to the file is the current count. So the current count will get written out to my file, whatever the new current count is after being incremented. At that point, I can then close the file, and that way the next time this page is accessed, the count that shows up will be the next number up from the last count that was shown. So I should get a constantly running count that goes up every time the script is accessed. Let's give this a try. Okay, here in my web browser, let me go ahead and access my count script for the very first time. And this is what I get. I get a count of 1 that shows up, which is right, because this is the very first time I've ever accessed that page. I also, though, you'll notice up here, get a warning. fopen count.txt failed to open stream. Basically, PHP letting me know that it tried to access a file that didn't exist. No such file or directory, it tells me. So when I tried to open my count file to read the initial count from it, it was not able to open it. And it's complaining about that. We'll come back and look at that here in 1 second. If I refresh the page, the count goes up, and if I refresh again and again and again and again, the count keeps going up. So it does look like we have a working hit counter at this point. If I go back though and I actually erase my count file, which is not normally something I would probably do too terribly frequently, but here in this case, just to help figure out the issue, if I erase my count file, if I go back to the browser and I hit refresh again, we do go back to 1, which is exactly the expected behavior, but again, that slightly obnoxious warning message comes back. That warning message really isn't all that terribly big of a deal. Part of the reason I'm seeing it is because I'm running PHP in development mode. I've basically told my PHP server to show me all warnings, all errors, any possible thing that could go wrong, tell me about it. That most likely wouldn't be turned on in production mode. So if this was out on a real website, chances are that warning would never show up. We might not even realize that a warning may be issued in that situation. But it still bothers me a little bit that that warning is popping up there. Part of what bothers me about it was that I expected it. I knew that there could be that problem, and I actually planned for it. On line 4 here, I tried to open my count.txt file in read mode, and I was fully aware at that point that an error might occur, or that that file may not exist, and that's what this if statement is for. Basically preparing myself for what happens if I can't open the file. Well, if I can't open the file, then I'm not going to try to read from the file, and I'm not going to close the file. I'm just going to go on and increment my default value for current count. So this was entirely planned for. So even though it doesn't do any particular harm, it still bothers me that that warning message is showing up. In just that kind of situation in PHP, there's a special operator that I don't know that I covered in any of the previous videos, so I'll mention it to you now. This operator is actually just an @ sign, and what you can do is you can put it at the beginning of a line that causes an error or warning. The @ sign is actually referred to in PHP as the error suppression operator, and essentially what happens is if you put it at the beginning of a line, that basically tells PHP, do not show errors or warnings coming from this line. You want to use it pretty judiciously. You wouldn't want to go putting that in front of every line, or you'd never know any errors that occurred. Your scripts wouldn't work any better or any worse, but if there were problems, you would not at all be informed of them. But I think that error suppression operator is the perfect solution in just this sort of situation, where I'm seeing a warning and I feel like PHP is picking on me for something that I didn't do, is essentially what it comes down to. So by putting that @ sign in front of that line, I'm telling PHP, look, I know this line can cause a warning, but don't worry about it. It's handled. When I put the @ sign in front of that line, then that'll tell PHP not to show that warning. So let's give that a try and see if it actually works. I'm going to go back and I'm going to erase my count file again. There it is. I'll wipe it out, which should put us back in a situation where the warning would show up when we first access the page. In my browser, if I then refresh, I go to a count of 1, so it did just not be able to read the file, created a count of 1 and then created the file, and this time it did not show the warning. So the error suppression operator did its job. And every time I refresh, my count goes up. The world can marvel at my incredibly huge hit count.